Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this first experimental session of Wicked India. I'm Rajesh Kasirangan. I'm also in a different time zone from most of you. It's morning where I am, and evening where you are for most of you, I think. This landing screen are the house rules. So mute yourself unless it's your turn to speak. Don't talk over each other. Be patient. All the usual kinds of things. And during the meeting, and we are all plugged into every kind of social media and other apps, I think it would be great if you give us your full concentration. All right. We have one more minute to go, and then we'll get started in a couple of minutes after that. The other thing I want to say is that this live stream has a maximum capacity of 100. So if by some chance we run over 100 people, which would be good news, I guess, in some ways, we'll be live streaming on YouTube as well. So we are at about 60 participants. I just want to welcome everyone once again. I think you are muted right now. Most important, please don't look at your WhatsApp messages and other things, emails, Twitter fights, whatever it is that we all are involved in every day. The house rules are, of course, primarily to manage a reasonably large crowd. And in the chat window, if you have a comment or a question, I think the star is the best way to indicate that. And of course, plus or minus are agree, disagree. Okay. So I'm going to give it one more minute before we start for real. There are 70 people, not bad. All right, so now I'm going to get started. I am Rajesh Kasthirangan. Thank you everybody for joining this, what we think is a very exciting class. We call it Wicked India. The name comes from not because India is wicked in the moral sense of that term, but because wicked problems are these really complex challenges like climate change that Socrates concerns itself about. The first thing I want to say is this session is being recorded, so I hope that's okay with you. We want to imagine India's future. So the typical understanding of climate change is something that is huge and perhaps not something that we can plan for. And at Socrates, we believe that actually, instead of thinking about it that way, we should think about climate change as something that's baked into our imagination of India's future. So that's what this Wicked India class is about. And I want to welcome everybody for joining us for the next 8 weeks. We'll be meeting every Tuesday. So I'm just going to go through the logistics. So every Tuesday at 7 p.m. India Standard Time and 8:30 a.m. where I am right now, which is in the Boston area, Eastern Standard Time. People will be voting as we speak right now. One lecture, which is the third lecture, will be on Friday. So instead of the Tuesday, it will be on Friday, November 20th, but at the same time, which is 7 p.m. IST. So that's me. So I'm going to be the fearless leader for 5 of the 8 sessions. There will be guest lecturers in some of the others. And I'm a mathematician and a cognitive scientist by training. I'm also one of the co-founders of Socrates. And once again, welcome to everyone who is coming in the last couple of minutes. So here's how each session is going to be organized. So the first half an hour is me or the guest lecturer talking, and that's what is happening right now. Then we have 30 minutes of group activity in smaller groups. We already have about 85 people here today, so which means that at least 8 or 9 groups. And then finally, there's a plenary session in which we invite you back and primarily present what has happened in the activity session in the 30 minutes before. And if we have time, then we will use it for further activities, right? So I want to set the mood for the next 8 sessions. I'm so delighted that everybody's here from many, many parts of India and actually, I think, other parts of the world. When we say that Socrates is so we call ourselves the midwives of collective wisdom. And that's because Socrates, the Greek, before he was assassinated, he used to call himself the midwife of wisdom. And his mother was a midwife. He said he was a midwife of wisdom because he was not wise, but in conversation with him, you become wise yourself. And so in midwifing our collective wisdom, I'm not going to teach you about climate change. It's not that this is not a course in which there is a curriculum about what is climate change and here's how to learn more about it. It's rather that there's a very incredibly diverse group of people. You already come to this with existing knowledge of your own. And I hope that we will find ways of aligning the knowledge that already exists in this community, and we get to build something bigger than what we are right now. These 3 are the main readings. They are available in the Notion page, which has been shared several times. We'll do it again. So the first one is speculative everything. So there's a new discipline called design fiction. And design fiction basically says, how do you imagine something in the near future, right? So science fiction could be things that are imagined hundreds of millions of years from now, spaceships going through galaxies. So design fiction is something that might be true in 10 years. So if you want to imagine India in 2030, that would be design fiction. So the second is a new book. So these are all relatively new books except for Kaviraj's book. Climate Leviathan is basically a take on a very famous book by the English political philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who wrote a book called Leviathan, which many people consider to be the foundation of the modern state, right? So Climate Leviathan is how do you imagine a modern state in the era of climate change? And of course, for India in particular, that we need to imagine what India's future is, and that's what the third book is about, The Imaginary Institution of India. Some of you are probably not used to reading book-length texts, so just be ready to strain your capacities a little bit. This Notion page is where a lot of the stuff will be archived. You've already received, I think many of you have received and opened the newsletter in which we will be sharing the weekly readings as well as the notes. It's a news, so I'm using a newsletter primarily because I don't want to be sending personal emails. It's much better coming from the community. And secondly, as this community scales, it's the one single source of truth for us. If you haven't seen the newsletter and you don't know what I'm talking about, please take a look at your spam or your marketing, like Google, especially Gmail classifies newsletters in strange ways. So please make sure that it's tagged so that it's in your inbox. Okay, so that's the first part. So these were the logistics. We want to create the future by learning the future. And as I said in my previous newsletter, learning the past seems to be pretty straightforward, right? Supposedly there are facts about the past and you can look at those facts and decide for yourself. The future doesn't consist of facts. It consists of possibilities. So we want to be able to map out the possibilities for India's future. And I'm hoping that because of the diverse range of this group, there will be many, many different possibilities that emerge because, say, you might be a historian by training, you might be a mathematician, you might be a filmmaker or an artist. And combining those possibilities is what I'm really excited about. Okay, so what is Wicked India about? It's primarily that India is going to be the most populated country on Earth, perhaps in the next couple of years, and will stay that way for at least the foreseeable future. We have a very large young population, lots of aspirations, and we have tremendous challenges in governance. Climate change is going to make those worse, right? And we, of course, are a deeply unequal society. I don't need to tell you that. And we are running out of the basic necessities of existence, air, water. So how do we create ways of responding to these wicked problems with some wisdom? And that's the challenge that we are taking up here. So how can India thrive in this turbulent era? And where we are starting at Socrates is that often the obstacle is a poverty of the imagination, and we always seem to think of futures that are, say, carbon futures. If you land in Bangalore airport and you take a drive down, I mean, you're already in a carbon future. You will notice all those ads for gleaming highways and large buildings, and that is what we think is the great future, right? And that's a carbon future. But then there are, of course, the opposite, some kind of mythical past that is fantastic and we should return to. And then the technological imaginations of flying cars and spaceships and whatnot, right? But we believe that actually, while these are wicked problems, the wisdom to address these problems already exists in the room, right? So the problems of the 21st century are quite wicked, but we need to build new infrastructures. Fortunately, that photo in it is not the infrastructure I would necessarily want to build, but I had to use a photo. At the same time, you have to meet human needs while building those infrastructures. And that combines, so the infrastructure, which is the material complexity that needs to be built, and the moral complexity of human communities comes together in wisdom. That's what we believe, right? And we have been experimenting with new tools for collective wisdom. I'm sure everybody in this room, in some form or the other, has heard about big data or data science. So we definitely think about data a lot. As a cognitive scientist, I think a lot about viscerality, the fact that we should experience the future, or we should experience our aspirations in our guts, in our bones, and tools for making that happen. And then we use design a lot. So these three tools coming together in some of the spaces that we have convened, and hopefully you will get a glimpse of that in session 5. And that leads to collective wisdom. Again, this photo is probably not representative of this classroom. I think on average, we are younger, and we are certainly more gender diverse. So the 3 interrelated themes, and I mentioned those at the beginning of the session when I introduced the 3 readings. One is speculative design and design fiction. It arose actually as a way to imagine products of the future, right? So you are an iPhone 12, what might the iPhone 18 look like? I mean, that's the typical kind of thing that designers try to imagine. But design fiction is actually about speculative futures rather than speculative products. And one of the most important entities whose future we can imagine is a nation, right? Because nations are imaginary institutions. And imaginary doesn't mean they aren't real. It's just that they came out of the imagination. And so then the question is, can we imagine the institutions of India's future that are responsive to climate change? So can we bake climate change into the future institutions of India? And we call that India story climate grammar, right? Which is to say that ultimately we are interested in a flourishing India in the 21st century and beyond, and flourishing for all Indians. And then how do we do that when climate change is going to be disrupting business as usual? And so what's the grammar of the future institutions so that India can flourish? Okay, so now we are ready almost to get to the imaginary institutions of the future. I'm going to share a video. This is nations are imaginary institutions, right? And it's hard to believe that nations were actually conjured out of people who, now we write stories about. So this is a very famous, so I'm going to play this.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean, by providence impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trading charter.
And every day while slaves were being slaughtered and carted away across the waves, he struggled and kept his guard up. Inside he was longing for something to be a part of. The brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter.
Then a hurricane came and devastation reigned. Our man saw his future dripping down the drain. Put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain, and he wrote his first refrain, a testament to his pain. Well, the word got around, they said this kid is insane, man. Took up a collection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came, and the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man?
Alexander Hamilton. My name is Alexander Hamilton, and there's a million things I haven't done, but just you wait, just you wait.
When he was 10, his father split, full of it, debt-ridden. 2 years later, see Alex and his mother bedridden, half dead, sitting in their own sick.
So that is a clip from Alexander Hamilton, the famous musical. And Alexander Hamilton was actually a remarkable person. He started many of the institutions that we now take for granted, including the banking industry in the United States. And that's an example of an imaginary institution. Of course, the US Constitution and other constitutions are examples of, including the Indian one, are imaginary institutions. And I find it amazing that people in the 17th and 18th century just created these institutions out of their imagination, and we live in the world that they created. And so my question really for this group is, what are the institutions that we are going to be hopefully creating that others will be living in, right? So here are the breakout room instructions. All of you will be randomly assigned to a breakout room. Each breakout room the breakout session has 2 15-minute segments. Each segment has a framing question. I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. Every breakout room should assign a dedicated note taker, right? Somebody who will be taking notes for the group as a whole, and then that person will present the group's finding to the plenary, which is, say, everybody. And before the session ends, please use the chat window. You can message everyone saying, here is the person in this group, so that we can use that name to call upon you later on. Okay, so the 2 questions for today. So the first 15 minutes, list the social institutions of India, right? So be as thorough as possible, which is to say, there could be anything, panchayats, there could be water sharing mechanisms, there could be tribal institutions. So list the social institutions of India that you can imagine in as thorough a manner as possible. This is just a way to start thinking about society as imaginary institutions. Then the breakout session will transition into the imaginary institutions of the future, right? What are the institutions, like parliaments, that you may want to see in the future? And of course, as a climate change oriented course, we would like to see those imaginary institutions responsive to climate change, but you can be as open-ended as you want. And then we'll be back in the discussion. So make sure that please do assign, I'll go back here, assign a dedicated note taker, and then let us know who that person is. So can we transition into the breakout space? So thank you, everybody. At least the group I was in was super lively. I hope you all had a good time and you're ready to share. So again, I'm going to just frame this discussion a tiny bit before I invite people to share their thoughts. So we have a list of people. Okay. So the idea for this course, right, is to go through this this kind of movement from I to we to us to ours. And so the basic idea is that we are starting from our personal positions, and then we get into a kind of alignment with others, and then we join with them, and then ultimately we commit to something. And there is a single exercise that I want us to do this over the course. So not during this session, but through the course, which I call the letter from the future, right? So, so imagine the India of 2030. Now it could be just you, it could be India, it could be some intermediate entity. So it could be your family, it could be your workspace. So what we're trying to do is to go from the I version of the India of 2030 to the we version, to the us version, to the ours version, right? And what's going to happen is that the next session is still going to, this is where we are sort of getting our thoughts out. Next session is still I, then we do we, then we do us, and then ours. Sorry, there's a typo there. Okay. So what we need to do is to design for these future imaginaries, and we've done a little bit of that. I'm going to start inviting people from the various groups to just give a very brief. So take a minute or two at most, because there are, I think, about 10 groups. So 1 minute, I think, is going to be um, as much as we can get. So for, let's see, we have Aditi for room 4. So Aditi, why don't you start by just giving a 1 minute overview of what happened in your group. We'll just do a rapid round from that, and I'm just going to use the chat window to call out the next person. So you should be able to unmute yourself, Aditi.
Right. We first thought of existing social institutions. So, excuse me, let me just go through my notes. Right. So, a couple of institutions that we thought of were things like courts, things like, one second, please. Things like the courts, constitution, religion, marriage, panchayats. And then we had another, and then one question that we thought of are our social and imaginary institutions necessarily mutually exclusive? And we also thought about whether imaginary institutions have to compulsorily be evolutions of existing institutions, or whether they can be novel entities in and of themselves. So we decided that it's not either or, you can have either of them. So these were some of the social institutions we thought of right now: the government, the economy, family, healthcare, religion. And then we decided to imagine a little bit, to think about imaginary institutions. So we came up with intergalactic affairs commissions, if say we were to discover aliens in the near future, or if we were to get rid of, or because we live in a world where we have to wear face masks, what if my face was projected in front of my mask, and then you'd need a ministry to look into censoring those. And then we talked about cloud computing becoming de rigueur right now. We thought about community living as an imaginary institution, global parliaments. Ultimately calls into question nationality as a concept. Why do you have nations if you're not going to, if like everything is going to be completely open? Voting representation to plants and animals, that was an interesting one that we thought of. And then we also thought of the social stock exchange that exists right now. It's how social movements get financial help. And then lastly, institutions allowing young
तो
people to make decisions for
बेटर होगा कि तुम एक
themselves
बार
and getting rid
वहां
of
पे
gender
कोई है तो
roles in
वहां से
raising
रीच आउट करो एंड उसके
Sorry, there's somebody speaking in the background. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Aditi, sorry to interrupt you.
So I'd like to apologize to my group. I think my minute is up. I'd
Yeah.
like to apologize in case I've left out anything. There was just a lot, like a whole lot that we took
spoke
down.
about the adoption thing.
Right. Yes.
yeah.
Adoption as well.
Adoption, like we don't want to have children, and we can only think of adoption to reduce the carbon footprints, is what we thought.
Okay, wonderful. So may I suggest that if you have written notes...
Sorry, I missed out on that, Manjula. There was a lot.
Yeah, we had a couple of things that we had discussed. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to keep us moving. If you have written notes, please email them to me.
Yeah,
right, so that we can archive them. Thank you so much.
What about type? Sorry to cut you off there. What about typed ones, Rajesh? Would you like to see those as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to move to the group which has Hari Dilip Kumar as the person for that breakout room. It doesn't have a number associated though.
Yeah, we're actually the new number, which is yet to be discovered in the near future. So
all right, go for it.
All right. So 1 minute, right? It's like,
yes.
I would just say that we looked at all the existing institutions and then we tried to see what they'd map to. Happily, there was a push in our group towards de-incentivizing people production and exploring polyamorous contract-based alternatives, which was quite interesting. We thought that democracy also might shift to a more device-based sort of phone-based referendum kind of thing, thus circumventing the whole political system. We envision in the next 10 years that the party system will crumble and local governance will take on a life of its own, including fulfilling such functions as security of communities and so on and so forth. The economy also will transition to a more sharing kind of perspective, and companies will enhance their existing human-centered design processes to become stakeholder blank. We're not sure if it's capitalism because it might or might not crumble. in the next 10 years. Production will be also decentralized because we didn't mention caste in our list of future institutions either, but I mean, that was supposed to be removed in 10 years by the original blueprint. But we have an AI regulation institution, and we don't have religion anymore, just places or temples, even just places to meditate. Also, our institutions will shift from the anthropocentric frame to ecocentric, where profits are directed to lakes, for example, and so on and so forth. Our jail system would change to in a different way because the institutions there would be oriented towards societal rehabilitation. Also, our currency system would change because instead of having a transactional one-dimensional currency, we'd have social ratings as currencies to enable certain kinds of consumption. And finally, everything would be based on cryptocurrency. The American imperial machine would have collapsed and the dollar standard with it. And we would have moved towards gender neutrality and from health as it is done now to preventive health. So that's our imagination, and cellular agriculture. Sorry about that. Forgot about that. Where I don't know if, yeah, meat is no longer an institution.
Very good. Wow. Again, if you have typed those down, please share. Or if you haven't typed those down, then type them down and then share.
Yeah, I'll share them.
Thank you so much. So we got Dia from breakout room number 6.
Hi. So we also, that's 1 minute, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So we also kind of discussed the similar institutions and broke it up into informal, the existing institutions into informal, economic, social, and formal state institutions. And then we talked about some of the things which are not covered, and we added on were communities like the social media community and entertainment, visual media. Then looking at pubs, bars, so some of these as well institutions that exist right now. And then the economic institutions like tribal community systems, the IMF, the larger global bodies like IMF, WTO, and all of that. And in terms of the informal institutions, we still have these agroecological communities, book clubs, think tanks, voluntary groups that exist, and then some of those. And then the formal state institutions, the one which have already been covered, so I'm not getting into them, but the municipalities, panchayats, zilla parishads, and all of that. In terms of the imaginary institutions for the future, we talked about different things. So some of the ones which came out were multicultural global communities. So looking at India and working from India and South Africa, a lot of these global South communities were facing similar kind of future working together. Strengthen the new ecologically aware farmer lobbies, so that still exist, but now they become face in a lot of ways. Parties which are green parties, and they do exist, but they're nowhere in the picture, so how they become more prominent. Youth decision maker communities, then communities for creative people and fiction writers, and they become storytellers. So it's not the climate science kind of gets replaced by climate storytelling. Then we also have talked about women-led and matriarchal societies, and women farmers becoming the face, or women-led communities as well as matriarchal societies. Then looking at data science for good. Right now, data science is only used by corporates, but how does data science gets used for good? We talked about an education system which has greater relationship to nature and the soil and all of that. And then we also talked about the restorative justice system, citizens forum beyond elections. We also talked about traditional societies and going back to barter system or different kind of economy which is not dependent on markets. And then there was one notion where we also talked about that maybe capitalism will get worse and crony capitalism will start becoming bigger. So that was the sad part of the imagination. Yeah, so pretty much more or less this, and sorry if I missed anything. There was a huge list and I tried.
Thank you, Dia. And again, as usual, do email the typed up list if you have it. So Sumedh from breakout room number 8.
Yeah, hi. So we started off, the first discussion was around, should we talk about sort of informal institutions such as caste and family and things like that? And I think we decided ultimately that we'll include those as well, along with more formal institutions like, say, the health system or the education system. So at that stage, we just sort of set up a Google Doc, and everyone was adding their inputs, set up sections for both the questions. And in parallel, we were also sort of categorizing them just to see what sort of broad areas they fall into. I think first everyone's minds just jump to governance, so things like hub, panchayat, parliament, and other government institutions. The next thing that everyone went to was sort of the community kind of institutions, which are the largest group, which included family, marriage, uh, tribal communities, included things like social, right? And then later on, we saw some more sort of culture focused groups like film clubs and book clubs and professional groups like trade unions. So at this stage, actually, someone posted a definition of primary institutions with sort of 5 different categories, and that validated our original assumption that yes, we can include things like family and marriage within the scope of this exercise. Yeah. So in imaginary institutions, again, we followed a similar process. People were just sort of like a brainstorming kind of scenario where people were just posting their thoughts in a particular Google document, and we were just trying to see whether there's some definite shift in terms of category. So there is one thing that definitely we saw, that there were things like gated communities, family bubbles for pandemic resilience, recycling clubs, where there's a lot more sort of decentralization of local administration and control, but also things like borderless world, religionless world, and to the dystopian side, decimated world, which sort of says that ultimately we're all going to share the same fate, or should in some way. Also a lot of things around tech, right? So robot societies, cyborgs, things like space travel and intergalactic associations. So yeah,
Right.
if anyone in the group wants to add something that I may have missed, please.
Well, we'll move to the next intergalactic association, which has Srichand from room number 5.
All right. Hi. I think our group covered quite a few of these things that we've discussed, at least in social institutions. The things that I could add are, I think, neighborhood groups, people's movements, NBA, CHIPCO, APICO, linguistic groups and ethnic groups, and also geographic ones where it comes to not just states and districts, all, which are revenue ones or whatever, but also to neighborhood and lanes. And also WhatsApp groups, which we still haven't figured whether it's just an online representation of similar groups that we have, whether it's workspaces or industry. The rest of them that haven't probably gotten as much attention is probably civil society, activists, NGOs, Section 25 philanthropies. We also talked about industries, distributors, producers, companies, all kinds of associations of persons, unions, guilds. Yeah. If I that so we've covered people's movements independent of activists, because these are formations that don't in itself have a life of more than anything besides the movement. And sports teams, consumer fans, Apple, Android, all of those kind. And I think media, financial institutions, and police, armed forces, that largely covers social institutions. Imaginary future institutions, somewhere around structures without leaders, or labs where different kinds of experiments can happen, cross religion, gender, and class groups, institutions that deal with conflict beyond just quote and war, but also local ones, intentional communities and utopian communities, and a lot more active civic sense of local governance, whether it's citizen groups or geographically distributed ones, but active ones. They're able to come together because of internet and things like that. Yeah, I think we've kind of covered. I've covered what our group dealt with. One thing was spontaneous groups arising out of issues that would become more frequent in the future.
Great.
Largely utopian. I don't think we've done dystopian.
Okay. I'm sure that reality will give us some of those dystopias. So, thank you, Srichand. Prachur from 2.
Yeah, I'm just going to paste our imaginary institutions on the chat as well. And we came up with, a lot of ministries were named. Human happiness, sustainable development, robots, space. We also thought about interplanetary association, given, I don't know. So some of the others that were were circular economy bodies, green eco communities at the neighborhood levels, paid ward level environment agents, even guerrilla groups that militant guerrilla groups that clean up air, water, or I don't know, maybe even violent. There was also some thought on the non-human aspect, so maybe a cooperative of non-human living beings, like an association of ants and birds and legal rights of nature. So that was another discussion point amongst us. We also had some groups, groups that would be, say, technology resistant or anti-technology. And different institutions at different levels, a stock exchange for civil societies. These are some of the thoughts that came from our group.
Wow, thanks, Prachur. So again, what we will do is tabulate all of these. I'm going to spend a little bit of time later this week to see if I can structure them. So if you send them to me as soon as this call's done, it'll give me a head start on classifying these imagination. It's going to be fun. Group 1, I think Manu.
Hi, Rajesh. So I think a lot of us already covered. In terms of existing social institutions, I think we spent some time on families, extended families, caste, religion, tribes, RWAs, villages, cities, self-help groups, teams which get formed spontaneously or as a part of the professional work, CSOs, advocacy groups, and all. I think remaining ones kind of have been covered by other members. In terms of imaginary institutions of the future, we talked about national, international energy exchange institutions, water collaboratives across nations, sustainability schools. Sustainability probably would be big given the climate change which is going to happen. We might even have UN specifically for migration due to climate change. We might have institutions for mitigating the effects of climate change, like water level rise and all that, and how do cities react to that. We might have social support institutions, both for elders as the population increases, as well as nuclear families, because they'll require a lot of institutional support to bring up the families themselves. We thought about regulatory bodies for AIs, because AI probably will require a little bit of nudging to make sure that just like we have nuclear non-proliferation treaty, we might probably have AI non-destructive treaties like that. Other one which I found really interesting was institution for wealth distribution. Given the way inequalities are increasing, probably that's one something that might come up in the future as well. I think I would leave over here. I've sent you the remaining ones completely anyway.
Okay, thank you. So finally, I think group 7, which I was a part of, but Arnaba.
Just one second. So, quite a few of them have already been covered. But some of the things that we came out with was the SFGs, FPOs, medical systems, religious institutions, Rotary and Lion clubs, groups of particular trades like the Dabbawalas, the Addas in Bengal, chain marketing companies, power brokers, book clubs, puja communities, the RWAs, pilgrimage and yatras, corporate groups, both physically and being in particular spaces and virtually because they're part of some groups and stuff, lake protection groups, literature festivals. So these are some of the ones in the social institutions. In the imaginary institutions of the future, we have the interesting ones: gender sensitivity camps, digital universities, humanist shakas, pre-university traveler clubs, Gandhi clubs, farming volunteer groups, bureaucratic accountability institutions at every level, funding bodies for principled politicians, uh, carbon pilgrimages, animal protection police force. Yeah.
So, quite the array. Have I missed any group? I think we covered everybody. If I haven't covered your group, this is the time to speak, or else you will hold your peace. I am really amazed by the diversity of views, both of the past and the future, that have emerged out of this. And it's a great kind of base out of which we can build future discussions, right? So we have lots to design future imaginations with. We will be inviting you to a Slack channel, which is where the sort of ongoing conversations are going to happen. So be ready for an invitation. The channel is called Wicked Minds. And let's see, why is I not able to? Oh, that's it. Okay. So we are almost towards the end of this session. I want to go back to this portion here. The main homework for next week, and I'll send out a Google form for you to enter that, is to write this letter from the future, right? So imagine that it is 2030 and you are writing to your past avatar from 2020, so a decade ago, and go wild. So imagine the India of 2030. It could be a personal imagination, it could be a collective imagination, it could be somewhere in the middle, and write 3 paragraphs, 2 to 3 paragraphs of what that future might look like, right? So if I want to make it more precise, just imagine that it's a press release. So you are being asked to write an op-ed piece for a newspaper. And so write the op-ed piece of 2030. It could, for example, let's say that it was interplanetary was mentioned a lot. So imagine that it's November 2020, and 2030, and you know that aliens are about to land, and humanity is about to prepare for that landing. So you could imagine writing that, right? I mean, I'm just making it up, but whatever you feel like. 2 or 3 paragraphs, and that will give us a way to build the common narrative as we go along. So next session is going to be on wicked problems. So this week I did not cover any of the technical material in the 3 books, but I will be assigning some readings from the books and perhaps a couple of other things, and from then on we will start becoming a little bit more didactic, right? If there are any questions, or this is the time to ask. We still have about 10 minutes left in the session. We have about 80 people. I really am amazed by so many people showing up on a nice evening to have this discussion. It's really heartwarming. So we have a great opportunity. If you have questions for me, or do you need to buy the books? So the Notion page that I linked to has PDFs of all of them. That's an easy one for me to answer. So yeah, it's already shared. So these kinds, if there are any such clarificational questions, this is a great time to pose them, but also there could be bigger meta questions. So I'm happy to answer anything that comes my way right now. We definitely want this to be a lively community. And I think that the Slack channels and the email newsletters are going to be the venue for us to talk to each other. Okay, yeah, so if you look at the chat window, the Notion page link is right there. Okay, any other questions? Any comments? Are there similar communities in the world, India, that are currently active? India, I don't think so. I mean, there are different kinds of groups. So I know that climate change is now much bigger in India than it was even, say, 6 months ago. I feel like the COVID crisis has kind of alerted a lot of us that, it's only the first of many things that's going to happen. So I know many groups that are perhaps slightly more domain specific. So there are teachers groups, there are student groups, there are sustainability collectives that are emerging, but future imagination, I'm yet to see a community. Yes, there's a speculative futures community. So could we get more information on the sessions? Yeah, so we will be filling out some of these. So, we didn't expect quite as much interest as happened. So we will definitely, thank you, Dia, for telling us about MindWorks. And maybe you can say a little bit more in the chat window. So the session 3 will be fleshed out soon. And then once that happens, 4, 5, 6 will also happen. 7 and 8 are going to be the project sessions, right? So those are like the hackathons where we will actually assemble all the things that we have done together. You are not able to download the PDFs. I'll see if I can put them into a Google Drive folder too, just so that, In case we miss any sessions, where will the recordings be put up? So every Monday morning, the Green Up newsletter will have the recordings as well as the notes, but there will be a YouTube channel as well. We'll just share that. Is there a way we can have some icebreakers with fellow community members? I think that the Slack channels, the Slack groups are probably the best place to make that happen. Only because with 90 people, it's impossible for all of us to introduce ourselves to each other live. What is the intended imagination or outcome? I mean, I feel like determining imagination seems like a contradiction to me. So I would rather not say what is the imagination that needs to emerge. All I hope to promise is that we will give the right context and settings for the imagination to emerge. So let me try not to over determine what that future might be like. Yeah. Will we be discussing integral theory? I don't know what integral theory you mean. You mean like the Ken Wilber sense of integral theory? Then probably not. Yeah. I mean, it can be a discussion that emerges in the Slack channels for people who are interested, but in the main sessions, I am unlikely to cover it myself. Yeah. Just curious why Socrates the name inspired and not any other philosopher. Hard to tell. I like Socrates. I think that's the, and so, so Socrates said that he was the midwife of wisdom, and we are the midwives of collective wisdom. So us rather than ease. That's the answer. Are there any governments, NPOs currently on board? Do you mean in this group or in Socrates' general activity, or can you please specify that? I mean, we work with plenty of governments and nonprofit organizations, but are there governments represented in this class? I don't know. I'm sure that there are people who work or have worked for the government. So. Okay, any other, I mean, please keep the questions coming. This is great. Is it mandatory on Slack? No, none of these are mandatory. I mean, nothing, it's an entirely voluntary program. So if you're the kind of person who gets overwhelmed by chat, then maybe Slack is too much. I do think that it's the best way to connect with other community members. Right. What do I intend to? So our hope is that we come up with some kind of imagination of India, say, let's say in 2030, as the imagination is going to look like. I don't know. Glad you liked it. Tare Zameen per session. Great. Yeah. All right, great. You were selected for government and chose to be non-government. Great. How can people from various domains bring fruitful thinking? Yeah, I don't know. So there will be some skill building and imagination sparking. So we will have to be careful about the balance of the two. Yeah, but I think at the beginning, it's definitely going to be more imagination heavy, only because I feel, especially in India, we don't get too many opportunities to exercise our imagination. What is the criteria to be fellow with Socrates? You give us a lot of money. I think that's the criteria. So if you have a lot of money, rough sense of person. If you're interested in working with Socrates, just send me a separate email, and I think that's the best way to have that conversation. I don't want to be too facetious. I think there's a great group of people, so I'd love to learn more. Percentage of imagination versus skill building. I would say more imagination than skill building for this course. We will be offering future courses that are, say, more specific skill building ones, right? So data or design. But this one, let's say I'm just going to put a number out there, 75% imagination. I would first start with the speculative everything, only because I think that that's the least likely that to be the one that people have looked at. Most of us are Indians, so I think we know reasonable amounts about India, and I'm guessing that everybody has some exposure to climate change. So of the three, I feel like the speculative everything is the one that we are least likely to have been exposed to. It is, yes. So Manjula, we are hoping that there will be the final two sessions are meant to be exactly that, collective design sessions. The readings are quite challenging, so it would be great if you can say a little bit more. Maybe send a separate email. The reason I'm saying that is I'm happy to provide scaffolding, but it's such a diverse group that scaffolding for one person may not be the same as that for others. So if you can write in what your needs are, we'll be able to help in the future. Why climate change in India? Why not how to make India an economic superpower? I don't think we can make India into an economic superpower without addressing climate change. Also, not clear what economic superpower means. I think we want to be a flourishing country. I feel like the idea of both superpower and especially economic superpower is a problematic notion to start with, but happy to discuss it. Right? Maybe we should have how to become a 25 trillion economy by 2030 as the focus of the course. We can always hijack it. So how do we stay inclusive? It's hard, especially because we are all on Zoom. We are speaking in English. We are, unfortunately or fortunately, the first world segment of India. And it's very, very hard to do that. And I think that it would be great to get suggestions from you. from how to address these equity issues, we are, of course, completely open to that. Okay, we are at 90 minutes. I want to thank everybody who is here for joining, and I look forward to doing this next week. So what I suggest is, if you can turn on your video real quick and say bye, and then we come back in a week's time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, sir.